to the fourth day of Black History Month and also the fourth day of Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action. My name is Ava Thomas, and I'm the Assistant Director of Racial and Educational Justice for the North Shore School District. I also have on here Dr. Bigelow. He's the Executive Director of our department, and Rena Harb, who is the coordinator in our department. I also have a lot of other people on this panel. I have Isaiah, who is a brilliant student and student athlete. I have Kenzie, who's another student and student athlete, and Maya, who is another student and student athlete. So thank you all for being here and participating on this. I also have Jesse Hagopian on here, who is a brilliant educator, author, activist, organizer, all the list of things. And I think the most proud I am to call him is my friend and an unbelievable collaborator. So thank you, Jesse, for being here. And I also have Michael Bennett on here, who is also an incredible human being, an athlete, an activist, and organizer. And I'm going to toss it over to Jesse to do a deeper intro of Michael. So thank you, Michael, so much for being here today.
Yeah. Yes, so let me introduce Michael before we kick off this panel. Michael Bennett, AKA Black Santa, number 72 with the Seahawks, attended Aleph Taylor High School in Houston. I need to find out what middle school and elementary school he went to yet, so I'm excited to learn about that today. But he played football there and baseball and track, and he played college football at Texas A&M and signed with the Seattle Seahawks as an undrafted free agent in 2009. And he's played for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Philadelphia Eagles, unfortunately with the Patriots, and also with the Cowboys. Over his career, Bennett made 3 Pro Bowls. He won the Super Bowl with the Seahawks. But most importantly, Michael is a human rights activist, a feminist, the author of Things That Make White People Uncomfortable, an organizer with Athletes for Impact, a leading athlete social justice organization, and he's a winner of the Seattle NAACP Service to Community Award. And him and his incredible wife, Pele, established the Bennett Foundation with the stated mission of promoting health and well-being of youth in underserved communities. And he's also a dear friend of mine. We met during the first Black Lives Matter at School Day of Action, where he came to support our community in Seattle. And that meant so much to me and all of our collaboration over the years. And he's championed so many causes and supported so many youth programs in the Seattle area and around the country. And oftentimes we only get to hear short sound bites from athletes, right? So today is a really special opportunity where youth get a chance to learn from someone who has dedicated their lives to using the platform that sports afforded them to really make a difference in the world, to make this place a more just and inclusive society. So I'm excited to be in conversation with the youth today and with Michael, and I'm going to turn it over to Isaiah, the great student and student athlete, to start our interview.
Hi, Mr. Bennett. My name is Isaiah, and I'd like to know about your experience as a Black student and what you did for fun as a kid.
It's a random question, sir. So I guess my experience, I think, as a kid is interesting because my mom was a teacher, and I had a lot of time. I spent a lot of time going to historically Black colleges. Spent a lot of time doing the NAACP camps, and I don't know if you know who Eddie Robertson was, but he was one of the most winningest college coaches. I guess he's passed on, but so I had a chance to go there, do football camps and stuff like that. But I think mostly of the time, I think that I look back at now, when I think about being a student athlete, I was telling my wife yesterday, or just being an athlete in general, I didn't really realize how often as an athlete, you exploited at a young age. And I think, so now that I look back, even though I played football for fun, sometimes now I'm looking back and questioning, was I ever doing it for fun? Or was I ever just doing it for just to succeed? I was thinking the things I loved to do growing up were like fishing. Obviously, I grew up back and forth out of Texas and Louisiana, and both of my grandpas had farms. So I always did a lot of stuff on the farm, and fishing and hunting, and also just reading. I did a lot of reading as a kid, especially encyclopedias. That was one of my punishments growing up, is had to read the encyclopedia. But I enjoyed that. I was always like a sponge for history. That was always my favorite subject. So those are things I like doing as a kid. And also playing GoldenEye. You don't know nothing about GoldenEye. Game back James Bond on Nintendo 64 and Streets of Rage and all those types of games we used to play all the time.
Thank you, Michael, for answering that question. I know that Isaiah was wanting to ask that because we've had some conversations around what it means to be a Black student and a Black child. And, you know, I know that we had a conversation previously with Jesse about, you know, the need to talk about our oppression and our resilience, and also our need to center Black joy. And so that's why Isaiah asked the question that he did. And so thank you, Isaiah, for asking that.
No,
Huh?
no, I think that was a great question, Isaiah, because like I said, I think it's just one of those questions. Like when you ask that question, it's like I have to like recollect and go into like my own self and start thinking like, what was my experience as a Black student? And I think sometimes, like when you live in that reality, you don't realize how much you had to overcome to succeed. So, a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Maya has the next question for you.
Yes, I'm Maya, and I'd like to know about your experiences in the NFL as a Black professional athlete and activist. And I also wonder why it was important for you to be in solidarity with Colin Kaepernick.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's a great question. I think being an athlete in general, I think what I was saying earlier about um, it's going to trail into the NFL, but I was just thinking like, you know, like my experience as a kid playing sports as a youth, I think it kind of has a correlation to the NFL because I think as a young child, I was telling my wife, I was like, how many young kids at 5 years old say that they're going to buy their parents a house? And at that point, I realized that I was never really ever an amateur athlete. I always had professionalism as an athlete because you put so much time into something at such a young age, and there's a lot of weight bearing on whether or not you are successful in that. And I think when you're going through the ranks as an athlete, it's so certain levels they start to pull away from your Blackness because you have to start to conform in some sense. You know, whether it's when you get to go to high school and it's kind of like, well, you can't talk like that, you can't say this, you can't speak like that. I just remember being at A&M and we had an etiquette class on how to speak, how to do this. And I think all those things are preparing us to be, you know, Manchurian candidates for the white society. And I think those things um, made it hard for a lot of people when it got to NFL because everything that they taught about resilience and all those different things, it got pulled away from them. And I think for me being in the NFL, there wasn't a lot of people to look at, even though things were happening all around us and for social justice and things that were impacting our community. I just can't remember many athletes before, you know, Carlos Hodges and all those people. I just think this big drought of athletes not really having this voice. And I think that kind of made it difficult in the NFL because there was no guidance on how to use your voice or how to use your platform. And I think in between the 2000s, there was a lot of change in how we communicate as human beings. You know, we started off with letters, we started off with emails, and then we went from something simple as Facebook into everything being social and learning how to connect with people on a global level. So I think being with Colin Kaepernick, it made sense because it was an opportunity to connect and be enjoying partnership with somebody who believes in the same thing you believe in. And I think if you study movements and you study history, you understand the importance of supporting people when they step out and on this level and knowing the kind of backlash, you know, because I think sometimes when you're young, you step out and you think that like when you're talking about race, it's like this small little thing. It's like you say something about race and how you're going to fight against it, and you think about oppression as in this sense, but you don't realize that you're really fighting against something that's really systemic and really ingrained culturally around the world. So you don't realize the amount of enemies that's waiting below, and they're just like those parasites. And as soon as you pop out, they start to jump on you and they start to try to leech and try to suck away your humanity in so many different ways. So if you just a normal person and you go on Facebook and you say, I believe in Black Lives Matter, you may have like, you know, two, 3, 10, maybe 20 people, depending who you are. But when you're an athlete, you realize that once you step out, you stepping out and you stepping into the light of knowledge and understanding and what the world is happening around you. And I think Franz Ferdinand's, black skin, white mask, those are things that kind of how I feel. Like it's like when you step out, it's like now your black skin is showing and you're not behind a white mask anymore. And it's like you're living in your identity. And once you start to live in your identity, as any superhero that starts to step into their identity, and I think anybody that steps into the realm of talking about these things, there's in the sense they are a superhero, right? Because they're doing something that the uncommon that's not common. It's uncommon to step out and put your life before for everybody else. And when you do that, you become there's villains that's waiting for you. So I think as an athlete, that was always hard because even inside your own building, you got this idea of exploitation and you have this, you're supposed to be a part of capitalism and doing what you're supposed to do. And anybody knows once you break the line of capitalism, there's always some kind of reaction. And that's the hardest thing for a lot of athletes. And so I say all that to say that that's why it's so important that us as athletes or people in celebrity or people who have a platform is to step up. Is because it's to unite the common person to know that you're not the only person taking a risk, that everybody else is along with you. And so when Colin Kaepernick did that, it was a call to arms for all athletes to follow suit and do what's right and use our voices and not be silenced, because there's so many people's shoulders that we're standing on when you start to think about the historical context of what we're doing and how we've been survivors for so many long, and it's ingrained. As Ava said earlier, it's like you're born with a sense of resilience. And I think the writer Angela Duckworth, she wrote about grit, and she could never understand about how African Americans had so much grit. But it's like when you're born in a sense of survival, you always have to. You're born with grit because that's all you know. This is your environment. This is who you are. So that's why I joined Colin Kaepernick. That's a long answer, but yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Michael. I know that in your answer, you talked about Black identity, and you also wove in there this conversation about, this broader need to care for each other and to care for our community and stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. And, I think part of that too is thinking about this brotherhood and sisterhood and collective value that we have for our people. And, one of the things that keeps me going is the relationship that I have with my sister, Kenzie, who I'm so proud of and happy to have on here. And so Kenzie has her next question for you.
Hi, Mr. Bennett. My name's Kenzie, and as Ava said, we are siblings. And I think the love between Black siblings is important and powerful. What does this love mean to you and your brother, and why is it important?
Well, that's a deep question. Thank you. You young people have so many deep questions these days. It's very thought-provoking. I think when I think about family, I think family is important if you understand going back, and when we think about racism, we think about slavery, to tear down the Black family was one of the most important things. So to me, keeping the family together is one of the most important things I can do. I think brotherly love and having that support through things like this has been one of the most pivotal things in my life that's been able to have somebody who understands me, that understands my connection to the world, that understands my connection to family, and understand who I am as an individual. I think that's what siblings do. They support you in ways that other people can't support you. Although friends are great, but sometimes, as they say, blood is thicker than water in some sense. And I think having a brother or sibling support you is one of the key ways to really get through all this, because there's so many moments that when you step out or you talk about these things that you have to be really vulnerable and open yourself up to the world in so many different ways that you can almost fracture your own being in ways, tearing away from your own spirituality, tearing away from your own humanity. And you need somebody to help you pick that up, because there's a lot of dark moments when we start to talk about the weight of the world and what's happening to us and what's happening on a daily basis around us, the death, the suffering, all these different things. So having somebody around you that can really pick you up and help you study and question you and push you to do and push you to keep going is, as Kendrick Lamar says, like we gonna be all right. And then that helps you go, you know, when you have somebody like that. And I think me being an athlete, having a team has always been a part of my life. So not only my brother, but having people like Jesse to talk to, or people like Angela Davis, or people just in general, just to have conversations with, because there's so many thoughts out there that you could think that your thought is not important, and then you talk to somebody else and they're thinking the same thing, and the universe is telling you to speak. So I think having a sibling is super important.
Thank you. I know that kind of going off of that, I know that a lot of your work has been centered around intersectionality and the importance of it. And so Rena has the next question for you.
Hey, Michael, just want to say thank you again for hosting this panel with my department. My question for you is, why do you believe it's necessary to have an intersectional approach to social justice work and collective organizing?
Well, it's Dr. King was ahead of his time. I think we start to look back at the history of what intersectionality is, and we start to look at Malcolm X and his studies and what he started to experience. And we start to look at a lot of leaders in the early 60s and the turn of the century. We start to study that they understand that, you know, even the NAACP, if we read Carol Anderson's Radical Bourgeois about the NAACP in the early census of the United Nations, and the understanding of why the connection of everybody around the world is important for freedom. And I think there's so many people around us, and I think the idea that, you know, that people keep us fighting against each other, and the idea that if one person's suffering, that we're all suffering. I think that's where the interconnection comes. You think the chain of humanity is within all of us, and I think if we start to see we start to lessen some dim light on somebody else's humanity, then we start to be a part of the problem. And I think intersectionality allows us to know that, you know, there's a war on poverty, and poverty has no race. You know, there's a war on sickness, and sickness has no gender. I think we have so many different things that are happening around us that requires us to communicate in so many different ways and connect. I think when we look at COVID-19, I think that it was a determining factor that we realized that this disease, it didn't care about how rich you were. It didn't care about how many followers you had. It attacked everybody. And I think when we think about racism, I think that's how we have to react, in that sense of coming together and attacking it from every sense of the way, because a lot of these things that we are facing, they're like cancer. They start to get in our DNA, they start to tear and start to take away from us. And I think intersectionality is the only way to really connect. And we start to see the suffering around the world, that, you know, that we can't rank suffering, because there's no way to rank who has the most suffering and who does less. It's like all suffering matters. And I think we have to connect in that sense. And I think when we start to study the people that we really care about and their philosophies. And I really think sometimes when we look at some people, we we don't really put them in the light that they should be in. When we talk about the genius of Dr. King, we put him in, you know, I Have a Dream speech, and that's to limit him as to really what he really was and what he really was thinking about. And we start to really dig in deep into his Bible or his words about intersectionality and how we connect in so many different ways. We have no choice to do that. And I think as you see the uprisings that are happening around the world, it's because people are being connected. And I think before, we had a lot of things that kept us apart. We really couldn't see what was happening in Palestine. We really couldn't see what was happening in Brazil. Yeah, we would read words and read literature and maybe see a newspaper every once in a while. But because of the way that the turn of the century has changed with technology, we're able to see. And I think it makes me mad sometimes, because white people are like, I don't know about racism. I've never seen it. Where is it? And it's like, it's always been in our face. And I think now with social media, we can't turn the cheek. We have to be able to face it head on. And I think that's what Instagram and Twitter, it allows us to be. In some sense, Instagram and Twitter has allowed us to be intersectional in a lot of ways. Sorry, that's a long answer. I'm just
Thank you. That was great. Thank you.
So I know that Jesse has a question for you now. And I know that part of this work is really reflecting on how oppression resides in our bodies and how trauma can reside in our bodies over time. And I know that you've talked before about the power of food justice. And so Jesse has the next question for you.
Yeah, there's a chapter in your book about food justice, and I know you helped to support campaigns here in Seattle to help educate youth about healthy food and healthy diets, and connecting that not just to individual choices, but to a whole system, and thinking about what uh, how food justice connects to the struggle for social justice. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think is when we think about, because currently, like, I'm just sort of going back to school, and I had this. I'm just going because it's connected. So no, I'm not going on a tangent. I'm just going to talk about it's connected in a sense. And I got to this point where it was like I have 9 hours to graduate, and I'm sitting here. I'm just kind of talking to my wife. I said, "Oh, I got 9 hours to graduate, right?" And but what I'm graduating in, it really doesn't make sense to what I want to do in life. And so I had to sit down and start to talk about what I really wanted to do in life, and what food justice is one of them. And now that I'm back in school, it's taking 2 more years to graduate and 3 years to, because now I switched to urban planning and architectural design, right? Because the understanding how our communities are designed and by plan to put food and take food out of our communities is kind of crazy when you think about how they create our communities and lacking of food. And this is not only food justice, but I was telling my brother the other day, and I was talking to my wife, and I was like, I'm trying to think how many libraries was in our community. And then I went and looked up, and I was like, oh, there was only one library. So, like, to go to say that, it's like, our communities are designed for us not to have access to the things that we need to feed ourselves spiritually. And knowledge is one of them. And I think we think about libraries, and food is another one, and not to have the right access to food. And what is our cultural heritage, and being able to for white society to be able to bet on America's fatness in a sense, because they bet on us not having access to better food, to the right health care, and all these different things. So that's one of the reasons why I got involved in food justice, because I realized the lack of nutrition and lack of access to what we really have. As I went around the world and went to different communities, I spent a lot of time in Native American reservations, around Seattle, around Washington, North Dakota, South Dakota, and spent some time in Haiti, and I've spent a lot of time in Africa and around the US, and just kind of Hawaii, and just kind of just looking at, what is the common thing? And it goes back to what she said earlier. And I looked at the intersectional thing that was one of the most common things was the lack of nutrition. And so therefore, that's why I was a part of, doing a lot of different um, campaigns and building gardens and giving opportunities, because I realized food is one of the only things that we really need to succeed, to live, right? And if we don't have food, how are we supposed to live? And I think those small things, we start to look at the disease that that's happened to us. Like, they're saying things are genetic, but really it's not really genetic. It's designed. It's designed for us to have, diabetes, because all we have uh, is fast food in our communities. We very suddenly have local gardens, things being produced. If you look at how communities, if you look at how they design communities, and once they start to be gentrified, the better stores start to come. But it's like that same neighborhood didn't have any fresh food, but now that it's gentrified, it has a Whole Foods now. So it's like food justice is really important. And we look at the amount of people that are starving. Um, it's insane. We thinking about going to the moon, and we building all these things, and we still haven't solved the most common thing in the world, which is starvation. And I think that's one of the things that kind of keeps me going a little bit, is being like, there's so many things that we can still do. And so I don't know. I think food justice has been really a part of a lot of things that I've done, because I just thinking about growing up and being on the farm and being able to go out and get our different things. And I think even if people aren't religious, I think about God in a sense. I'm just like, here's a creator that gave us soil, and we just put something in it and water it, and something grows out of it that feeds us. And I think that's kind of crazy too, when I start to think about it every once in a while.
Yeah, I love your thoughts on that. And I know in the conversation that me, you, and Jesse had, we talked about how we really have to think about the roots of architecture within global Black communities, and how Black people were some of the very first architects ever. And I shared the example of Seneca Village in New York City, and I would urge people to look that up, and how it's now only known as Central Park in New York. And so when you're talking about food justice, it's also making me think about mutual aid and community care within Black communities. So I'm wondering if you want to say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's funny though, because I think about like a lot of people want, like I was thinking about a rap, like because I do music a lot of times, and I was thinking like everybody want to be Drake, but nobody know who Theaster Gates is, right? And Theaster Gates is one of the greatest artists of our generation, because his art to me has really transformed. To think about redesigning our communities and giving us spaces to exist, those are important. And I think uh, having it, like what you're saying about Seneca Village, and really putting our hands into the dirt and thinking about ourselves as designers, if we go back into who we were before we were slaves, we look at the Egyptian temples, we look at the designs in Mali Empire, Senegal, the things that we built with our hands, those were designed by us. And I think connecting and looking at what the Gates is doing, and redoing the libraries and redoing things that have been run down. And you think about it in the sense of, when you start to talk about architecture and creation, we start to look at, like, if people are inspired by where they live, inspired about what's happening outside, the outcome of their life changes too, right? Because when you walk outside and you see something that is inspiring you and gives you a sense of creativity, and feels like that where you live is important, you cherish it and you take care of it a lot different, and you see things a lot differently. And I think when we don't have people coming back to our communities and redesigning them and making us look at our spaces and saying, these spaces mean something to us, this park means something to me, I was here when I was a kid. And not just in the sense of recreational centers and giving us things, because I think sometimes, even when I look back at it and look at my school, I'm like, dang, we always had a new football field, but we never had a library. Like, we always had a new football field, we always had a new basketball court, those things that were able to be exploited, we always had a lot of that. But things that would help us gain knowledge and gain skill, we never got people to integrate that into our education, nor did we have them facilitating funds to make it, to grow it.
Yeah, and so I think that, like, shifting gears a little bit, I know that Jesse also introduced you as a feminist, and I think it's so profound. And I've read a lot of Bell Hooks, and she's talked about how everyone needs to be a feminist. And so I'm going to hand it over to Jesse to ask the next question.
Yeah, I think some of the greatest work I've done was collaborating with you to support the Coaching Boys into Men program at my high school. All of the male athletes had to go through a Coaching Boys into Men program, as well as the female athletes went through a similar program called Athletes as Leaders. And this was all about creating healthy relationships and teaching kids about sexual assault and the alternatives, and how to build actual healthy relationships. And it was really great to be able to work with you on that. And I know you've done a lot of work supporting, the women's strike and other movements. And I wonder if you could just talk about, like, why you're a feminist, why that's an important part of your identity.
I think I think one of the people I respect most in life is Dr. Harry Edwards. And I think The Revolt of the Black Athlete was a book that I read early and really quite often. And I think it was a couple of years ago, he had a new forward in it, and he talked about in his book how he lacked the connection between what was happening in the athletic world with what was happening in the women's movement. And he took a deeper dive into his own self and looking at why he didn't have that voice and why he didn't do the things that he needed to do. And I think that was a very eye-opening thing, because this is a man that has done so much has had so much respect, has done so many great things. And I'm thinking like, here's a guy who's accomplished so much, and he's even questioning how he could have improved better. But I think for me, feminism or being a part of talking about what's happening to women, I think that's just a part of humanity, honestly. I think for me is because it's like people say feminist, but I just say it's just humanity to care what's happening to another human being, which happens to be a woman, what's happening in the schools. And it's like we all come from mamas, we all have sisters, we all have aunts. And I start to think about the different experience when you start to think about the sexual trauma that women experience, you start to think about what's happening around the world. Women, it's like you have no choice. If you are who you say you are when you come to your belief systems, then you really can't question the importance of why it's important to believe in women and support women through their own struggles. And I think as a male, sometimes we become egocentric and we think that our struggle, and it goes back to ranking our struggles, is more important. And it's like, a lot of societies are judged on the art and how their women are treated. And I think if we look at, uh, you know, even Marcus Garvey, and you really look at his book, and he was talking about how Black women were treated in the 1920s and how, how if a Black woman is treated in this way and her man can't protect her or she can't protect herself and she has no rights in society, then we have never really accomplished anything in our own culture. And I think if we look at feminism, then it's important for us to support our women because women are human beings in a sense. And that's why for me, it's always been really easy to just connect because it's the right thing to do. It's like, I'm not going to be talking about, police brutality, but then I can't talk about what's happening to women. And I think that's the thing sometimes as a leader, we or leaders, they kind of start to try to pick sides and instead of just doing what's right. It's like you want to find the fault in the ideology of somebody so you don't have to believe in the rights of that person or believe in the rights of the humanity. But I think when I look at the women's rights movement and things that the women have been doing over centuries, and especially Black women have to endure a lot when you start to look at when you start to look at the history and start to take a deep dive in some of these historical books, you start to look and read some stuff you read, and it's overwhelming. And I think one thing that really pushed me to even more understanding feminism and understanding it wasn't so much of a book; it was a trip. And you've been to Glory Island, and when I was in there, and I was thinking like, man, like these women kids had to be taken from them, they had to be separated. The houses changed the walls. No, were chained to walls, but the experience of how they talked about women and how they used the woman, it was just like, man, like, why can't, this is where humanity can go. And how important is it to make sure that every human being on the face of the earth is treated fairly and feels that they can be safe in their own skin and be safe in their own identity and be safe in their own world. And I think that's why it's so important for men to be a part of feminism, because if we don't do it, who's going to do it? If we're not a part of their movement, especially as a Black man, I think as a Black man, if we aren't out there supporting Black women in their fight, if we only bring up what happens to Trayvon Martin, what happened to George Floyd, we only bring it up about them, then we really are really adding to the fuel. Not saying that what happened to them is not important, and what I'm saying is that if we as men aren't bringing and marching the same way, so that's why it was so important about Breonna Taylor that around the world that people joined it in that way, because we look at Sandra Bland, we look at Charlene Allows and all those things, there wasn't that type of uproar about Black women who have faced that type of uh, dehumanization, that type of vibe, that type of feeling. Like when we think about immigration and we see a mother being pulled from their child, like that's the kind of stuff that makes us feel the lack of humanity around us. And I think for me, you know that's always been important. And I've been lucky to be able to have conversations with some of the greatest women on this planet. Michelle Alexander, Angela Davis, Patrice Collars, all these great people who, as women, the danger is almost is double. Because you know and I think about women too. I'm like, women are really the birth of the world. Like, right? Without women, there is no life. And I think men think that, are part of it, but like we have just a small part of it. And I want to talk about what happens in between making babies or whatever, but men have a small part of it. Women birth the child, they nurture the child, they give life to the child. The love that they give to a child helps a child succeed in the world. So I think women are so important to the survival of mankind.
Well,
Sorry.
thank you, Michael. Appreciate you.
Sorry, I'm going on tangents. I'm gonna make the answer
No,
short.
no, you're dropping knowledge. I want more young male athletes to understand that they can be feminists and that can be part of being uh, a male athlete. So I appreciate your words, and I want to turn it over to um, Dr. Bigelow, the executive director of Racial and Educational Justice, to ask our next question.
Thank you, Jesse. And thank you, Mr. Bennett, for being here today and supporting this work. So much appreciate that. I know you've talked before about the need to destigmatize mental health, which I completely agree. Could you tell us why you think it's important to normalize these conversations from a young age?
Yeah, I think we started to talk about trauma, and my wife is reading a book by some author. I don't even know his name, but I think it's a woman, and she's talking about trauma, and she talks about it every single thing, and she's diagnosing me all the time. I'm like, stop diagnosing me, all right? Stop it. I love you, but you diagnose me again. I'm walking out the room. But no, she's just talking about like how trauma is connected to us in so many ways, and sometimes it's woven in our DNA, the experiences that our fathers had, or our mothers, or our grandparents have, and talking about the how mental health or trauma can affect us is an important thing. And I think sometimes in schools, when I look back, because my mom, she actually works with traumatized kids in the school district, and she really focuses on that. And I look back at it, and I think sometimes when um, teachers aren't equipped to, I don't think every teacher is, it's kind of hard to put teachers in certain situations, because talking and dealing with trauma can, if you never experienced the trauma that the person has had or that is currently experiencing, you really can't, sometimes you don't know how to talk to them. And I think talking about mental health in our community is super important, because a lot of us are dealing with a lot of trauma on a daily basis that we just don't know how to speak about. And sometimes we just, the way that we act, we're acting it out. And I think sometimes even in sports, to get to sports, and I started thinking about some of the guys, and I'm like, wow, like playing football to them is a way to inflict trauma that they have on themselves, or trauma that they experience on another person. And like once they lose that feel or lose that cord, like the trauma that they never really dealt with, it starts to creep back into their life. And because they don't have that outlet, they turn to different types of things. And I think if we aren't equipped to deal with trauma at such an early age and give people the help that they need, and have them being able to communicate, because I think when we talk about trauma, we talk about mental health, we have to really talk about vulnerability. And I think sometimes we aren't really giving men or young children or young girls the opportunity to be vulnerable in society and have these conversations about themselves that they need to have. And I think, mental health and being open about it is about us having these vulnerable conversations with other people, and knowing that these spaces are safe, and not knowing that people will tear us down if we are being open about what we experienced or how we really feeling about what's happening to us. So that's what I think. I don't think it's right, but I was just
Well, I appreciate that. Jesse, you want to wrap it up? Your thoughts?
For sure. I think Ava had one more question, and then I can help bring us to a close.
Okay.
Yeah, so one of the themes of Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action is being unapologetically Black. And, we've had conversations within our department and just broader conversations in general about, we can't pick and choose which Black Lives Matter. We have to be firm in our stance that Black Lives Matter at school. And we have to be unapologetically Black. And MLK Day was last month, and, you hear him talking and he's like, I'm Black and I'm proud. And so that's why I'm wearing my Black and proud shirt today. But I just wanted to wrap up on a last question for you. What does it mean to be unapologetically Black?
to me, unapologetically Black is to just be myself and not really care about how other people experience me. using my voice, dressing my skin, letting my hair grow the way that it naturally grows, just being who I am and being comfortable within it. And I think that's what unapologetically Black means. It's like loving everything about being Black, loving the culture, loving the music, loving the way that, you know, the slang, and loving the way that the food is cooked. Like, to me, that's like I loving that and loving me and not wanting to be changed. Because I think sometimes when you walk into certain sectors in life, and you become a part of the silo, people want you to conform to their identity. They want you to be a part of their social group. And it's like, no, I can dilly dab in it, but I love being my Blackness. I love going around the world and speaking like this, dressing like this, being who I am. So that's what it's about me, is just being proud. Like, when you stand up to that podium and you talk about what Black Lives Matter, you being proud. You're not being scared to say how you really feel, because I'm unapologetically Black. You know, when I say those things, I mean it. I mean everything I say when I'm being me. And I think just unapologetically Black is just being you to the highest level and being comfortable being yourself and never let anybody dim your light.
No doubt, man. I appreciate that. And I think I just want to send us home about thinking about how we can build a whole society where kids grow up knowing that it's okay to be Black, that they can be unapologetically Black, and they won't be targeted in school or held back or pushed aside or pushed out for being who they are. And one of the great joys of my life is getting to organize with you, Michael, and being part of Athletes for Impact. And I think just to have us end on a final understanding that the long Black freedom struggle has really been animated by collective struggle. And so much of our society is trying to teach us that it's all about your individual achievements, right? It's all about the accolades you get on the sports field, or the great, even academic achievements you do as an individual. But we rarely celebrate the collective struggle. And in fact, that's what has made all the great advancements for social justice in the history of our country and our world. And Black people have been at the center of some of those most important struggles. So too often, I think history gets taught as the great men came down and transformed our society. And in fact, it's often women, as you pointed out, and but it's always a collective struggle. And you can look at the abolitionist struggle to end slavery, or the civil rights and Black Power era, or what's happening today. And so, just our last minute, I don't know if you want to say anything about why you engage in collective struggle and Athletes for Impact.
Well, I think, as I say, like, I love Angela Davis, everything she did. And I think when we look at freedom as a constant struggle, and we start to look at the intersectionality of what she's talking about, and how, even if you, like I said, if you look back at Ida B. Wells, W. Du Bois, and understanding why they thought that collective, people coming together and fighting these struggles was important. And I think for me, actually for impact, and knowing that, I'm not alone in my beliefs. I think that's what collective strategy does. It's like, if you're building something and you use one brick, it's very short, it's not that tall. But if you have the opportunity to use build a billion bricks, you can build the Taj Mahal. So I think about that as being how we should look at struggle. It's like, it does it. We just believe we just have one Martin Luther King who would never have a change, but it was the people that Martin Luther King inspired. So even when he looked by himself, you look at him and then you look over him, there's a million bricks of people behind him. And I think that's why freedom and working together collectively is important, because you can never really, we start to talk about creativity, you can never build with just one object. You need multiple objects. And I think in struggle, it's the same idea. You need multiple people, you need multiple ideologies, you need multiple of everything to really move forward. And you just can't use men, you have to use women, you have to use whatever there's out there, kids, children, whatever people believe, gender norms, or whatever it is. You got to be able to use a lot of people and connect people in those ways. So for me, Athletes for Impact has been so cool, because first it was just football players, then it was like connected to basketball players, baseball, tennis, track, and then it's like now we are global. We go from just being in our little sector to being connected to people all over the world and doing things that's bigger than just ourselves. And I think that's why collective things is important, because um, it's just like Fred Hampton said, you can kill the revolutionary, but you can never kill the revolution. And it's like, if you have a collective, if you have a collective group of people, then there's always going to be people fighting for what's right. But if one person dies with knowledge, that's it. And I think that's why it's important to have a collective belief system and collect with people and do it. You know, even if we look at America, even though America has its faults, if we look at the founding fathers of America, it's funny because you look at their belief systems and the things that they believe in, civil rights and believe in you know, all these different things and humanity and right and all these great, you know, the first thing they say, we are the people. And I think it's like we forgot that. It's like we are the people is one of the most important things in there, because as we think about it, we are the people that really make what's right and what's wrong. And I think if we are connecting with each other, we really taking steps to really fix, you know, the suffering around the world, the starvation around the world, the pain. It starts with all of us being able to connect with other people.
Right on. Thank you.
Well, I think that concludes our time. And thank you so much, Michael, for sharing your incredible wealth of knowledge and your brilliance with all of us today. I really appreciate having you here. Thank you to our students and student athletes who are incredibly brilliant as well, who added an immense amount to this conversation. Thank you to my department for being here and sharing this struggle with me. And thank you to Jesse. I so appreciate you and all the work you do. And Michael, thank you so much for spreading your message, because it's incredibly powerful. Thank you, everyone, and have an amazing rest of Black Lives Matter at School Week and Black History Month.